Hi guys, and welcome back to the Rach Active podcast. My name is Rach J. I am your host. I'm a master coach, the founder of Core 30. I'm so excited to welcome our awesome guest to the show today. He is a mental health advocate, an international speaker. He's spoken at TEDx. He's also an actor and the host of his own podcast, Move Your Mind. Welcome to the show, Nick Bracks.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being on the show. I'm so excited to get to chat to you about all of these awesome topics. So one of the really fun connections I feel like we have, which you may not know about, but we've both been on Neighbours.
I didn't know that, but there you go. It's that's another connection. Yeah, exactly.
Another connection. So you were on the show up until 2018 and you were playing the character of Brandon Danker. And so that would have been a really fun little stint for you, right? To be on Neighbours? It
was fun. I mean, it was sort of one of the first acting jobs I got, and it was just a good experience, being on set, how quick turnaround it is. You're having to, I think there was a day where I had to film 7 or 8 scenes in a day or something like that. And so from that side, it's really good. You get over a lot of, it makes you confident for other jobs of just, being on set and that whole process and mechanics of it. So it was good, and, made a couple of good friends. Still, Tim Kano, he's one of my close friends now. And, that's probably the best part of a lot of these things. You end up having friendships that last through it. So it was good. When were you on it?
I was on a couple of times a while ago. So I did a couple of guest spots. The first time I was on was way back when Margot Robbie and Sam Clark were on the show. And so it was through their Donna Ringo storyline. And then the more recent time was Jordan Patrick Smith was on. So that was the Andrew Summer storyline. So now he's gone on to do, Vikings and all that kind of stuff. So there's all these people that have done Neighbours that have just springboarded off to do some amazing things. But what's really cool, like you were saying about making friends on Neighbours, I don't know if you find this, but I feel like a lot of my actor friends, most of them have been on Neighbours. It's almost like this kind of rite of passage that you have to go through as an actor to get onto Aussie television.
Pretty much.
Yeah, but you've been in the media and entertainment industry. I mean, not just, as an actor, but throughout your career doing other bits and pieces. And so, it didn't always begin like that in terms of you feeling comfortable being in front of the camera and or in front of people, for that matter, speaking in front of a lot of people. And you've kind of spoken about being this really kind of socially anxious kid. So can you kind of speak to that and where, your journey started? Because, you've gone through a lot of stuff to bring you to the point where you are today. So can you kind of take us through that journey?
Yeah, definitely. And it is kind of if I think back of, where my mindset was in my early 20s, the last thing in the world I would have thought I would do for a living is, public speaking and exploring things like acting. It's kind of crazy, but I've always had anxiety and had, struggled a lot with anxiety, OCD and related issues as a kid. And that became a really big problem for me. And I had this whole, sequence of events and was off the rails for quite a long time after school, and, had identity problems, I guess, and insecurities, and didn't know who I was. And, there's a full, big backstory to all of it. But eventually when I was working through things and piecing myself back together, I had to do public speaking in this course at university. I dropped out of the first one, and this was a business entrepreneurship course where you had to do a lot of talking. And I was so shy and insecure at that point. I couldn't, look someone in the eye and have a conversation, and let alone talk in front of people. And I'd be doing these talks in front of, just 5 people and vomiting before I'd go and do it, and having it, written out word for word on a sheet of paper and staring at the floor, mumbling and, not making any sense of it. But it was the best thing that could have happened to me, because I had been in a bad way for a long time. I knew at this point I had to stick to doing this course because I needed some sort of, reason to get out of bed and purpose. And I had to force myself to just, suffer through doing these talks. And after a year of doing that, I became comfortable at doing it. And then I got better and better. And it really just paved, the way for me for other opportunities that came up with TV things and different things, and actually getting asked to speak in the media, and eventually doing, public speaking and running programs, and, some of what I do now. So it was a big transition, but it sort of, really reinforced to me that anyone can go and do anything, and we can't, listen to these stories that our mind tell us, which all of us do. I do it to this day. I think we can't help it. Like, I think anyone would, even the most successful person in the world, would be lying if they said they don't have to fight off, negative storytelling, because it's part of the human condition, and we're so exposed to it in, day-to-day life with mass media and social media, etc. So it's was a great lesson, which I think, we all need to apply to our, daily lives in whatever we're doing.
Yeah, 100%. I feel like even, people like, I was listening to a podcast recently where Hugh Jackman was talking about how he still has doubt about his ability, and he's, done such an incredible, job with his career that to this day he still has to deal with those kind of negative stories that he tells himself. So, it's been such an amazing journey for you to go through what you've gone through, and dealing with your own mental health and those kinds of things like anxiety, depression, those kinds of things, which, we are, recording this during this global pandemic that we're all experiencing at the moment, which is bringing to the surface increased levels of these emotions like anxiety, stress, depression. And now, you have, you do a lot of work in the mental health space as an advocate through speaking and your training programs and those kinds of things. So have you noticed that there's been an increase in the demand for these kinds of resources in terms of mental health?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's on that end of it, it's kind of weird because there is a huge demand, but there's so many resources out there. And I think, like anything, which I find, quite dangerous in this area, because mental health now is, such a big issue, and it's so talked about. There's so many people also that are trying to, be capitalistic about it, and how can I quickly create something and leverage from this mental health trend and sell something. And so it's very, very convoluted now. So it's sort of, there is opportunity, but there's also, or demand, but there's also, a lot of noise out there. And really what I'm focusing on more so than, the financial side of programs is just doing, I've sort of put all of that on hold and, just doing the podcast and trying to use my voice to just put out positive messages and direct people on, where they can go to get help, because I just think there's too much noise out there, and people need simplicity, and people need, just specific information about what to do. And it is scary, how big of an issue this is. It's like, suicide's obviously, going up, and I don't see things, going away in these mental health issues anytime soon. There's going to be a lot of collateral damage from, what's happening here. So we need, all of the positive support, we can get out there.
Absolutely. Because it's not just, what's going on right now, because we're obviously in Melbourne and we're going in and out of lockdown. But when this whole thing does eventually come to some sort of end, or we can return to some sort of normality again, there is going to be the after effect of that. It's not something that just kind of happens in the moment. It's, something that you live with. It's a journey, right, that you go through. And I'm interested because, I've always felt like there's been a stigma around mental health and around the conversations around mental health, whereas perhaps now it is becoming a little bit more normalized to speak about it, and which is a really awesome thing, because we all experience these kinds of emotions. And it doesn't have to be like you're depressed or you're not depressed. It's like to different degrees, right? It's a continuum where you might experience different levels at different periods of time. So I'm really curious to know from your perspective, for people who haven't spoken about it to anybody, because sometimes, people might feel like, other people, their family, their friends won't understand what they're going through, and they've never opened up about it before. So what would you sort of recommend for people who have never spoken about these kinds of feelings to anybody else?
Yeah, and you're right. I think that's like a really positive, and we can, there are positives that come out of this whole situation, and people, it is more normalized, probably for a bad reason. People are suffering to such a degree that they don't have a choice, but okay, I need to talk about this because I'm really not in a good way now. And I can't believe, especially it's elevated here in Victoria, and I can't believe how many people I'm hearing from that are saying they've never had a mental health issue in their life. They've always been so stable, and they're suffering. And, if you see that, it's like, it's scary, the people that are suffering. So for anyone that, isn't comfortable talking about it, I think just reminding yourself that, number one, there's nothing wrong with you if you're suffering. This is very normal. It's actually probably more normal right now to be struggling than, I think you'd be sort of superhuman if you were unaffected completely, from what's going on in the world. Forget Victoria, like you said, it's elevated here, but globally, it's pretty hard not to be somewhat impacted by what's happening. So number one, that's normal. Number two, okay, if you might not have someone directly you can talk to, or you might not trust them or feel comfortable. That's also okay. If you have nowhere else to go, online. I always just say type into Google free mental health helpline. You can go to, Lifeline. There's so many of them. Call one of them. It's anonymous. It's a free call. And then from there, you can tell them what the problem is, and they're professionals, and they can direct you to the, resource, to what's out there. So I think it's just really important. The thing that I always say is the one thing that you should not do is nothing, just do something. It's when we sort of sit on a problem and ruminate that it compounds and becomes worse and worse, and you get stuck in a hole. So just do anything. Normally the first step's the hardest part. Once you do that, things will, you'll start to open up doors of how you can deal with this issue.
And I think the thing too is there is an element even of acknowledging that you're having those feelings, because part of it is to accepting that you are feeling these feelings that maybe you've not acknowledged before. This situation is bringing it to the surface, and so you do have to face them in a sense. So there is this element of being vulnerable, which you've spoken about a lot in your work, to be able to connect with people and open up and share those sorts of feelings and experiences. So, and particularly as a man, in this kind of culture where, you've talked about this before, this kind of social narrative or this ideology that a lot of us are taught that, real men don't cry, don't have feelings, you can't express your emotions, that vulnerability is a weakness. I'm really curious to know, so how you have sort of managed to disperse or kind of like dismantle that narrative for yourself, because you talk so much about your journey and go into quite, a lot of detail in terms of what you've experienced. So how have you been able to do that for yourself?
Yeah. And I think it's such an important point, because it's sort of, we can't stop our mind from thinking about things, like whether it's positive, negative, indifferent, our mind is going to think. So for me, it's really been, it goes back actually, and I talk about this a lot, sort of really the most important lesson I learned was when I was at uni having to do these talks, because I would be, vomiting before I'd go and talk. And like the example I gave before, and my mind was telling me, Nick, you're pathetic, you're not good enough, you've got nothing good to say, you're going to make a mockery of yourself, everyone's going to, you just don't have any ability to go and do this. And to, such a degree, and it had been a story I told myself for so long that had that physical effect. So having to go through that and actually at the beginning, doing a pretty average job, I may as well have been speaking another language, no one would have heard what I said. But I showed to myself that, hang on, in this situation, even here where probably one of my most dreaded, results happened, I didn't do a great job, I've still been okay, and people have been, kind to me about it and not judged me and whatever else. And that, part sort of paved the way for me for other things. Not long after that, I was on a reality show on Dancing with the Stars, which, I'm a pretty shocking dancer. That's the last time I'll ever dance again. So I hope anyone listening to this did not see that. I feel very sorry for anyone if they did see it, you probably still have PTSD. That's why I got into mental health, because of the trauma I caused from my bad dancing. But it was, it went from the speaking to, 6 months after getting over this speaking thing, I'm on a reality show, dancing in front of a live audience, 3 million people watching it live on TV. I wouldn't even dance if I'm out with my friends, and I was still really shy and getting over issues. So this was a whole nother extreme, and I almost didn't do that, but I drew on the experience that I learnt in university and applied it to that. And like I said, did a bad job, but got through it. And it reinforced that lesson, which for me now, anything I'm facing that's difficult, I draw on these things and I remind myself, okay, you know what? Yes, it's not going to be easy. And yes, my mind is telling me all these different things and it might feel unpleasant right now, but I can choose whether I want to buy into those thoughts or not. And it is a mindfulness thing where you pull yourself out of the situation and think, hey, what's going to be good for me longer term? And I'm going to, go through this short-term discomfort because I know it's the better thing for me to do. And I think that's where we can all fall, by the wayside when we let our emotions get the better of us. And in the moment, we're reactive rather than, being able to have that bigger picture. And that's when things can, progressively go off track. So for me, in a very long-winded answer, that's sort of for me what I've found has been, a really effective, tool that I use, daily in my life.
To be able to put yourself in that situation, then draw on that experience, definitely. But then, you sort of talk about too having the awareness around even the thoughts that are coming into your mind, because sometimes I feel that developing that self-awareness is almost the start of the process, right? Because if you identify so much with those negative stories that our mind tells us, it kind of just is kind of like this domino effect that affects your perception of yourself and then obviously your behaviors in the world and what you choose to do. So this idea about developing self-awareness about firstly your thoughts, but then also your emotions and understanding what they are. How do you think people who perhaps are, they know they're struggling but they're not quite aware yet of that they can control their thoughts? Because what was that moment for you where you actually realized that you had the power to change those thoughts or to either buy into those thoughts or not? What was that moment for you like?
Well, I think it's again that story that I just gave you. And as you said, I don't think you can't really change. It's what I would say to people is, like I said in that story, it's, my mind is telling me these crazy stories that are so ingrained that I'm having a reaction about. If you sit there and think, okay, I need to stop thinking negatively, I've got to think positive, I can't allow myself to even have this thought. Probably what will happen is you'll actually, the thought will become louder and you'll have more of them, because it's like anything, you tell someone not to do something, they'll do more of it. It's how the mind works. So we can't control that. So it's more acceptance. It's thinking, and that's what self-awareness is really. It's being able to look at things without, that immediate emotion, not letting the emotion control you of, right now, my mind's going crazy, I'm thinking all these things, that's who I am, that's defining me. It's not defining you, it's just what you're feeling and experiencing in that moment. But if you can step out and look at the bigger picture, this is who I am. And, you can go so, many levels of this conversation that I think is so problematic in society where, you look at this on any level, people most of the time, and not by their fault, by how we've been conditioned in society and schooling and parenting and, all those different elements to it. We've been taught that we are what we do, or we are what we, I'm Nick, I'm an actor. Well, no, I'm not. Acting's one thing when I'm lucky enough to get given a job, which isn't often, but sometimes I do what I do, but I'm not an actor. I'm Nick. It's like, who are you? You're not this thing you do. That's great, but you're not. People are, defining themselves by external things, which is incredibly dangerous, because until you change that, you are going to be unhappy, because even if things go incredibly well, life is cyclical and things will change. So, I think that's such an important thing that we can understand that and start learning how to go about, giving ourselves self-love, and going internal rather than external.
And that's another thing that you talk about, which I really loved, actually. I think this is part of your TED Talk, where you talked about our values and how, especially now in today's world, and perhaps more so with the younger generations as well coming up, they've grown up with social media and all of that kind of stuff where, there's a lot of value placed on how many followers you have on social media. And like you said, material things or things that are external to us. So, what would you kind of suggest in terms of, perhaps people who are going through this period of time are now realizing the value that they had placed on these things that perhaps are, they shifted purely out of circumstance because, businesses are suffering at the moment, people's jobs, people have lost jobs, all that kind of stuff. How are they able to regain this, I guess, better sense of connection to themselves and to people who are important to them rather than things outside of themselves?
Yeah, and it's hopefully another positive, thing that can come out of this, trying to really reset values. And I think maybe for some people it will, some people it won't. But yeah, I think really just values is such an important thing, and it all comes again down to self-awareness. I think a lot of people don't actually understand why they're chasing more followers or why they're chasing fame or why they're just reacting and doing it. And if they really looked, did some sort of peeled back the layers, they'll probably see, oh, well, maybe something happened to me when I was a kid where I felt like I wasn't significant enough. I might have been bullied, and now that's become the story that I've played in my head, and I'm now only enough if I can prove to all those people that bullied me that I'm a huge success and I'm popular and I'm more popular than anyone they knew, and, that means I'm enough. And it's kind of crazy when you think about it because it's not based on anything that you really care about yourself. So it comes back to looking at what do I actually care about? And if there was no such thing as, social media or money or whatever, what would I be doing? What's important to me? What do I actually enjoy doing? And enjoying the process of what you're doing, that's what it should be about. If you can't enjoy the, day-by-day process of doing things, you're probably not doing something that, is healthy for you. If you're having to completely suffer for this end reward, the reward, no matter how big, is not worth it because you're dedicating so much of your life to being in pain. So I think it comes back to really looking at changing how you look at things, instead of what can I get out of this, changing, what value can I add and what's important to me in this, what do I enjoy doing, and yeah, I guess like we've been conditioned to be quite selfish in our thinking as well, because it's always through social media and all these things, it's all about me, rather than trying to, do things for other people, which ironically, doing things for other people is what will make us feel a lot happier anyway. So what I always say as well is, and, I'm not the most amazing person. I'm selfish. I can be selfish, but I feel the best about myself when I go and do a talk, because I'm like, I'll go and, show vulnerability, and then you see people getting a change out of it. I'm like, oh, you know what? That made me feel really good, better than any other material thing. And I want more of this even so I can feel good. So it's like, do it for that reason, if that's the motivation you need.
Yeah, I feel the same, and I feel like this period of time has been really such a reflective time to be able to, look at your life and really understand yourself better and ask yourself those questions like, what is important to me? What do I want to spend my energy and time doing? What do I want to give people? And I think that's a really great way to frame things for yourself, to take the focus off you. And I think that's a really important thing, because those kind of emotions like anxiety and depression, you're thinking about yourself a lot of the time when you're kind of in that kind of cycle of thinking about, you're not really thinking about anything outside of yourself. So I think that's a really great point to kind of bring up. And, sort of on that as well, in terms of, giving back to yourself in a way that is healthy for you. Like you mentioned before, giving yourself self-love, essentially. You've spoken about, creating routines and healthy habits and developing discipline, in your day. So can you kind of talk us through what you sort of do in terms of your habits daily, to take care of yourself? Yeah,
and I think it's one of the most important things because and often people have things that, they do that make them feel good, or we do reactively, that it's like, okay, things are going bad now, I'm going to go and, exercise now because I'm feeling bad. So I think it's just so important to make it like part of your day and find what you can do. And for me, I've been meditating for almost 10 years now. I learned TM, Transcendental Meditation, or Vedic Meditation is another name for it. And that stuck for me. It's simple. You got a mantra, you sit there for 20 minutes and say this mantra, which I think it helps with so many things, and it's able to just give your mind that time to be still. And so that's one thing I do. And I'd say for anyone wanting to learn about meditation, there's no perfect way to do it, and there's apps out there, and you might only want to spend 5 minutes a day doing it, but there's it's just sort of starting and making it a routine. I do gratitude journaling every day when I wake up. I exercise. I mean, the number one thing for me, which I always talk about, is exercise. I used to be a semi-professional athlete. That's what I wanted to be as a kid, and it's been, exercise and sport's been one of the biggest parts of my life, and that's just something every day, or one day. I have one day off a week, but it's like oxygen for me. I have to do it, and I just, I just talk about it till I'm blue in the face, and it's something that we all know about. But at the same time, for mental health, it's profound how much it helps, and so many people can advocate for that. And we all, like I said, we all know it. But when we're stuck in that rut, people put off exercising, and it might be as simple as, and right now, we can't do a lot. Well, it could be as simple as, okay, I'm just going to get out of the house and go for a walk for 20 minutes. And it's amazing even how much that can open up your mind and make you feel better. So for me, they're the three things. Probably outside of that, acting and doing creative things, I've actually find, for me on a wellness level is so important for me, because it's a creative outlet. It's a way to, express yourself. It's a way to process a lot of thoughts that you have and put them into something. So that's probably the fourth one for me.
I'm so glad that you brought up this connection between movement and mind, because I feel like it's pretty much the reason why I do what I do in terms of the fitness industry, because for me, movement is, I do it because it just helps my mental state so much. And I know that, physically, of course, there's going to be benefits, but in terms of, getting that mental game strong, and just also being able to clear your mind when you've got, stuff going on in your life, it just gives you that outlet to I guess, have almost like meditation is how I sort of find it sometimes. And you have mentioned, throughout your journey that, like when you were younger, being more into footy and stuff like that, and really trying to train to become, because that's what you wanted to do, right? Become a professional AFL player.
Originally, yeah.
Originally. And sort of what I had looked up about you is you talked about overtraining during that period of time, and sort of being so disciplined, but like waking up at 2-3 a.m. in the morning, going to train, then going to school, and essentially using movement almost as an escape from what you were going through during that period of time. So obviously now your relationship with movement has changed, where you're using it more as a way to gain energy and enhance your life. So I'm really curious to know, because you've sort of used movement from different perspectives, how have you been able to transform it, from something that was quite, I guess, more of an escape, as opposed to now as consciously using it for enhancing your mental state? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, that's another thing. I think, again, it comes down to self-awareness, in that we're not really educated about addiction, and addiction can be anything really. It could be work, food, exercise, anything. And yeah, like you said, for me at that point in time, I was young. I had a very, or still, do have quite an obsessive sort of mind. And at that point in time, it was just, that was the thing it latched to. And because of the anxiety and lack of self-awareness I had, it all manifested in, okay, I feel in control. And I guess so much of it is, you want to feel in control. So you're just doing something you can control to that extreme level. And it stopped me having to think about all these other things I couldn't control. And through coming through that and understanding myself and having that self-awareness, I have just learnt, not just with exercise, but with, so many areas, that everything's about balance. And, I can find my mind when whatever's important to me, I can, start fixating on, the current project I'm doing or whatever it is. And then it's just catching yourself and realizing, okay, you know what? Yep, I'm doing everything I can for that. But sitting here and just, obsessing about it's not going to improve the situation. So it's being able to just maintain that balance, because, and that's the tricky thing about, everything in life, it's all balance, because we can go too little or too far. So it's like trying to just check in with yourself all the time and, making sure that, again, as we've talked about so much in this chat, self-awareness is probably the biggest part of being able to, keep that balance with everything.
Self-awareness is key. And I always, kind of come back to that. And it's just so important to know yourself really well and take the time to get to know yourself. I don't know about you, but I definitely found through acting has been one of the greatest ways that I've learned to become more aware about my own emotions, because, when you play another character, you need to utilize those things within yourself to be able to take that and then put it into, essentially another person's point of view, right? So have you found that going through acting and learning more about yourself?
Oh, massively. I think acting's probably and I recommend it to anyone. I think it's one of the best personal development things you can do. And I still remember when I first got into it, the very first day I was doing this full-time acting course, and the teacher said, you're now going to unlearn everything you've been taught for the last 20 years. I was like, oh, I didn't really know what he meant. But then, you realize, okay, well, it's because, we're undoing all this conditioning. And to be able to perform well, you have to, number one, understand yourself inside out and not let your ego take over. And then you have to understand other people. And like you said, you have to be able to access emotions and, understand them, because if you can't, how can you play someone else and perform? And if you can't have empathy for someone, how can you then put yourself in their shoes, even if they're doing something bad? And I think, again, this is really relevant, because in culturally, if someone does something bad, a lot of the time it's labeling, they're bad. It's like, okay, I'm not saying one way or the other, but let's try and understand what drove them to that behavior. And acting forces you to have this mindset where you're having to, really try and look at the behind the scenes of what's happened and why someone's become like that, which I think just for humanity to be able to connect more and understand each other. If we all had that mindset, it would eliminate so many issues and people would connect on such a bigger level. Yeah. So I think it's so important. I think it's a great point.
Yeah. And I mean, for me, this is just what I've found. Acting is just aside from acting, I think if you're not an actor, from the outset, it is easy to kind of look at the profession and go, it is a bit of a narcissistic profession, and it's about, being in front of the camera and all about me and all that kind of stuff, and which I've spoken about before in another episode. But, the greatest lessons that I've learned have been, big life lessons from acting, which is learning about myself, self-awareness, but also the greatest lessons I've learned from acting is about failure, about rejection. And, you, I guess, automatically are put into a position where you are going to face those things as an actor, because you do have to drop your ego. You can't, you sort of, to be successful as an actor, to perform well in service of the work, you can't allow your ego to kind of get in the way of what you're trying to do. I mean, you're a vessel essentially for the work, right? So one of the things that I really loved about something that you've said too is that it's okay to fail at things. This is to quote you in your TED Talk, and also that often we learn our biggest lessons through failure. So I'm really curious to know what your biggest failure has been.
Yeah, and it goes back to what you just said before about acting. I think it's, it can either break a person or make a person, because it's a pretty full-on thing when you're having to just show complete vulnerability and be rejected over and over and over again. But then it changes your mind to when you don't end up, if you can, look at it in the right way, then you start realizing it doesn't matter. It's not about that. And like I said in that TED Talk, I think failure, like we need to change our psychology around failure. I think you don't fail because everything I've learned has been through failing at things. So if you change the psychology of, I'm trying to, do this new pursuit, I'm either, this is the goal, I'm either going to achieve that or I'm going to learn something. So one of two things, they're both going to be positive outcomes. So for me, I've failed. Couldn't even tell you how many times. Like daily, I'm failing at so many things. But I think that's actually good because that's getting you closer to the right, decision and right way to do things. And if you're not failing at things, you're probably not putting yourself out there enough and trying hard enough because that's how we learn. That's how we get good at something. They say it takes 10,000 hours to get good at something, and you listen to all these, and it's all over the internet. Michael Jordan saying he failed however many times. He was dropped from the junior team he was in, and was told he wouldn't amount to anything. But you just keep going and going and going, and it's the only way you can become successful at something, and it makes it more meaningful as well. I think that's the other thing about failure. If things just happen for you, it wouldn't really mean much. You haven't had to, the significance of it. So I think it's a positive thing in that way as well. And that's the advice I have to myself and other actors out there. It's like, and the only thing I've heard, the number one thing I've heard from any successful actor is if you want to, the one thing you can control is just keep doing it. Just keep going. Don't have a time frame on it. Don't have a rule in your head about how it has to happen. Just keep going. And most people do drop off at some point. So the one assured way to not succeed is to stop, so you just got to keep going.
That's true. You just got to keep going. And and so even with, rejection, because that's another thing as well. As an actor, you're rejected millions of times before you get a yes. But what's been your greatest rejection?
I mean, businesses I've been involved in, being failing at a business, being rejected in trying to get, funding for a business, being rejected by girls. That's happened. I don't know. There's like so many. There's
so many things.
I don't know what the biggest one. Yeah, I don't have any one rejection burnt in my mind because I actually don't have any regrets really. Because I'm, the one thing I can put my hand on my heart and say I have done is just always tried to live authentically to what I've wanted to do, and it's come at hardship. It's come at having basically no security for my whole 20s, and failing all the time and whatever else, and no certainty and stress and anxiety. But I have followed that, so it also means there's not much regret because you've at least tried.
Yeah, I mean, that's one thing that I've always kind of thought is sort of like, what's the worst that can happen? I mean,
exactly.
Give it a crack, and if it doesn't work out, oh well, move on to the next thing, I suppose. Really,
exactly.
Otherwise, you're just held back, and you're driven by fear, your fears of rejection and failure.
Exactly. Yeah. It comes again down to perspective and realizing what's actually important. Like, like we put so much pressure on all these things. It's like, even if you have a lot of success, that's great, but it's also not, we don't have to be so serious about it. It's like if it's like a friend or a loved one or someone we care about, or the fundamentals, that we should worry about that. But the career stuff, it's like, even if we do it or don't do it, it's all right. Just try and enjoy it more and not take it so seriously.
Mm. Do you think that, sort of being in the position that you have been with, because obviously your father has been such a public figure throughout your growing years, do you think that that's a lesson that you've learned from that, from being in that kind of environment?
Yeah, a little bit, probably more so just from trial and error and, putting myself out there. You start to realize what you care about and what's important, but probably as a byproduct, it would be a little bit as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Cause I a lot of people do find it difficult to put themselves out there, even as adults. I know we learn it, conditioning, but even as adults, people find it quite difficult to do that.
Scary.
Yeah, it's scary and it's fear. So what's one thing that people can do if they are feeling that fear? How would you suggest people deal with fear that might be stopping them from doing things?
I would say if you are feeling it, not, to not label it and not try and get rid of the fear. So like, I think it's being honest with yourself and realizing, you know what, it is not going to be easy and it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be probably the harder road in the short term because we all want to stay in our comfort zone. So, you know, I think accepting it is not going to feel good. And then, you know, sort of knowing that and being prepared for the discomfort, and then doing it anyway with that knowledge, rather than, I think, again, on that reactive level, we can be, it's just looking at it like, you know, I don't want to touch that fire because it's going to burn me. It's like, no, well, it's not going to, you know, understanding that it's not going to feel great emotionally, but we're also not in danger. So, and then understanding why you're doing it. And if it is, you know, if the positives outweigh the negatives, then, you know, you've got to just find the willpower to push yourself to do it.
Just go for it.
Go for it. Yeah, there you go.
Go for it. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Nick. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a really great chat to get into all of these amazing topics with you. You're so well rounded and versed in this space, so I really appreciate it.
No problem. No, thank you for having me on here. And yeah, anyone listening, I'd love them to also check out, if you don't mind me mentioning, I've got a new podcast called Move Your Mind with Nick Bracks. And if you go on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, you'll find him interviewing a whole range of people and, you know, talking about similar things to what we've just talked about here. So love you guys to, you know, check it out if you're listening. Yeah, so make sure you, so if you like this episode, screenshot it, share it to your stories. Also check out Nick's podcast, Move Your Mind, and you can also find him on Instagram at Nick Bracks. So thanks so much for joining me, Nick. And you guys, thanks for listening, and I will catch you on the next episode of the Rach Active podcast.